Welcome to your Harvey County Digital Legislative Update. I am your host, Lance Gormley. Our guest on the program today is Kansas House District Representative Stephen Owens. For those of you living in Harvey County, you've probably heard of Rep. Owens because he just might be one of your elected officials. Let's welcome to the program, Representative Owens. How are you doing today, Rep?
Hey, I'm doing good, man. How are
Good,
you doing?
very good. And I really appreciate you coming on the program, taking the time. I know this is a very busy time for you all, and things are just getting adjusted. I know it's a rat race the minute you start the legislative season. So how are you doing? What are you doing right now up there in Topeka?
Absolutely, man. Well, first I want to clarify, my name's Stephen, not Rep. So anybody sees me out and about in the community, it's always just Stephen. Title's just a temporary part of what we do, and I mean, I understand we need it in committees, but I'm just the same old guy I was 5 years ago when I started down this. I just have a desire to help make Kansas a better place. So anyway, just wanted to throw that out there for everybody to keep in mind. But no, we're just starting our second week in the legislature. Last week we came in early in the week and everybody got sworn in. Started to kind of get our feet under us, learning our committee assignments, getting to know some of our responsibilities. Now, I've been asked to be a chairman of the Corrections Juvenile Justice Committee. Some of you guys may have seen some of the stuff I'm working on that we'll talk about. But I'll be chairing that and then continuing to sit on the Judiciary Committee and on appropriation. So having a say-so in our state's checkbook is really an awesome responsibility as well, making sure that we're being very prudent with your tax dollars. So, yeah, a lot of things happening. One of the things I wanted to touch on, Lance, though, that's going on that was released last week by the legislature, some of you guys may have seen it on my social media platform, is our commitment to Kansas, a better way. What our Republican caucuses in both the House and the Senate released is our commitment to Kansas and the things that we're going to focus on. So I thought I'd touch on a few of those. I thought I'd also talk a little bit about some of the things we have going on in our committee, and then see if there are any other questions before we wrap it up. So what for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm interested in that. I did see that come out. I read those commitments that were put forth, and if you could touch on that, that's very good information. Yes, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to start off. I'm just going to read the foregoing paragraph because it really sets out what our goal is in our Republican legislature. And it says, America has always been the land of opportunity, but over the last few years, American optimism has turned to profound pessimism as jobs shrink, paychecks stay the same, and cost of living for food and fuel go through the roof. The good news is we are Kansas, and we value hard work, faith, freedom, and family, all of which will guide us through the current challenges toward a brighter, more prosperous future. We won't sit idly by and hope Washington fixes our problems. Here in Kansas, we want a better way forward. That is why we are committed to a policy agenda that puts Kansas families first by protecting our communities, honoring the value of work, and making Kansas the greatest state in the nation to live, work, and raise a family and retire. This agenda puts individuals, their freedom, and their way of life before government. And I think that really sums up, my philosophy is that, we are people first with inherent rights and freedoms and liberty. And government, while a necessary part of that, should only provide certain functions and do certain things. And I'm a firm believer that generally less government is better government. And so we're going to be looking at some things over the next 2 years. So the legislature works in a biennium. So we work on a 2-year cycle before we're all up for re-election again. And so this is kind of what we're laying out. So I'm going to touch on these. So these are our commitments to you. First, it's your money, our commitment to the taxpayers. We believe Kansans should keep more of what they earn and spend less to Topeka. So we're going to look at things like ensuring our budget is balanced, we're paying down debt, we're eliminating wasteful spending, and of course making sure we save for a rainy day.
Yeah.
We want to make the state tax code flatter and simpler to help families and businesses and reduce the tax burden on both retirees and families. So there's going to be some emphasis on taxes and what makes sense, because we are sitting on record revenues. And while certainly got to prepare for the next recession, which for all we know may come this year, We still have got to make sure that we're allowing Kansas to keep as much of their money as possible because everybody right now is struggling with inflation, cost at the grocery store, cost at the gas pump, cost on our utilities. I mean, the list just goes on and on. It's a struggle for everyone right now, so we're going to do our part.
Yeah, I know. I know one thing that seems to be quite the conversation on the streets right now is that there is a surplus there, and that the legislature. We're going to watch and see how it unfolds and what is done with those finances. And I know all eyes are on Topeka when it comes to that. So a lot of people get confused. I'm sure it won't take very long before you'll be getting emails about everything happening in Topeka, even though you're not necessarily able to do much about it at that time. Could you kind of just like you go on a committee, you get appointed to a committee, and then just explain a little bit of the flow of what's taking place with your committee right now, and then how that feeds into the bigger picture.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So, it's important to realize that every legislator that's elected has the ability to introduce whatever legislation that they want. Okay, so I could introduce legislation that says on Wednesdays the sky is purple, and have that introduced. It doesn't mean it's going to go anywhere. Actually, generally each session there's about 700 pieces of legislation that are introduced. And on average, 10% or less actually make it through the process. So it's really hard to pass legislation. But once a piece of legislation is introduced, then it's up to the speaker to decide which committee that goes to. As you heard me mention, I chair the Corrections Juvenile Justice Committee. So generally, most anything dealing with crime, punishment, law enforcement ends up going to my committee. And so, we receive a lot of bills throughout the session, many of which we won't hear, we won't work, they're not a priority. Because again, remember, I'm a believer that generally less government is better government. Yeah. And so I try to be very selective on the legislation that we choose to move forward. But take, for example, a bill that we're going to be working on, some of the juvenile justice reform things. And one of the bills that I introduced will expand the use of the Juvenile Justice Authority funding to include at-risk youth and not just youth that are already involved in the criminal justice system. So if we could touch these kids with programming before they're catching charges and in the system, that's really what we want to do. So that's one example. And then ultimately, as the chairman of that committee, I'm the one that decides what gets heard in my committee and what doesn't. And so if there's a piece of legislation that I don't like or don't want to hear, then we won't hear it. And on the flip side, if there's a piece of legislation that really needs to be heard, we hear it. We have a series of committee meetings where we hear from proponents and opponents on that legislation. And then I decide whether or not we actually work that bill, which means are we going to take a vote on it? Let's assume that we do, and we pass that bill out favorably for passage. So then it goes to the House floor, where with a recommendation from our committee that it is passed favorably. And then it's up to House leadership whether to hear it, whether to take a vote on that bill. If it passes, they decide to, and it passes, it goes over to the Senate to go through the exact same process. And if it passes over there, it goes to the governor for a signature.
With all that process, that is a lengthy process, is it not?
It certainly is.
Very good. I'd like to say...
I like to say... Oh, excuse me. I was going to say, I like to say that there's 1,000 ways for a bill to be killed and very few ways for it to be passed. And so I understand making laws is supposed to be a difficult journey.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to what you just mentioned about what we might be doing to be more proactive when it comes to the youth and deterrence in our state. And I just appreciate your forward thinking on that. And I'll be watching that. Is there right now, is there any other things that you see kind of gaining some traction or maybe even some attention in your committee that's being discussed
absolutely.
right now?
Another pretty big topic of conversation many people have heard me discuss is the current state of our highway patrol. The troopers in our state do a yeoman's work in ensuring that our laws are kept, our families are safe. And they have really been in a state of mismanagement for a number of years. We have seen multiple civil lawsuits